High in the Italian Prealps, the alpine chamois is caught in a squeeze between a rising thermal ceiling and an apex predator. This is Monte Grappa. It is a relatively low mountain massif, peaking at about 1,750 meters. Looking at the topographical boundaries of this habitat, we see a sharply restricted high-elevation green zone. This population is geographically isolated. When conditions change, they cannot migrate to higher ground. If we plot the GPS fixes for adult males during the summer, they form a dense cluster packed tightly against the mountain's absolute upper limits. Layering in the GPS fixes for females reveals an identical spatial reality. Both sexes are compressed into the exact same geographical bottleneck. Within this confined space, the chamois face two compounding pressures. Wolf packs have recolonized the area. Simultaneously, the baseline for summer temperatures has been steadily creeping upward. Because these animals physically cannot climb any higher to find cooler or safer terrain, their only mechanism for survival is behavioral adaptation. In behavioral ecology, a foundational premise is that severe environmental stress forces an animal to alter its daily schedule, a concept known as its time budget. The classic prediction states that an herbivore under pressure should sacrifice time spent foraging and resting to increase its vigilance against threats. The data from Monte Grappa presented a paradox. Despite the presence of wolves and extreme heat, the macro time budgets of these chamois remained completely static. They didn't stop eating, and they didn't spend more time looking over their shoulders. Instead, the chamois responded to these stressors by altering how they interact with one another. This chart shows the rate of aggressive interactions per observation as ambient temperature increases. This is the central anomaly of the study. As the temperature on the x-axis rises, the rate of female aggression spikes sharply upward, while male aggression drops completely flat. Why do male and female chamois exhibit the exact opposite response to the same thermal stress? To solve this anomaly, researchers isolated the specific environmental variables at play, beginning with predation. They fitted 4 wolves in the region with GPS collars, specifically tracking nocturnal location clusters that indicate a potential kill. Over a 4-year period, field surveys tracked these coordinates and verified 238 distinct predation events. Using this data, researchers calculated a kernel utilization distribution, a spatial metric that maps the precise probability of an animal utilizing a specific area. This resulting spatial model predicts the exact zones where a chamois is most likely to be killed by a wolf. By factoring in terrain roughness and distance from hiking trails, this roster creates a high-resolution landscape of fear across the mountain. Researchers now possessed a quantifiable metric to test if predation threat was altering chamois behavior. With predation mapped, the team shifted to the bottom-up stressor, exact thermal load across the habitat. They deployed 28 temperature data loggers, mounting each sensor 1.5 meters above ground level. This map shows the strategic placement of these loggers across the elevation gradient to capture a comprehensive thermal picture. The loggers were deployed in pairs, one in an open meadow, the other adjacent in a forest, to measure the exact temperature difference provided by microclimate cover. By merging the wolf risk raster with this thermal matrix, every single chamois field observation could be tagged with precise, localized predator and climate data. Researchers recorded thousands of field videos, analyzing the behaviors using generalized linear mixed models. The architecture of these models tests a response variable, like time spent foraging, against the main predictors of ambient temperature and wolf risk. When they ran the macro time budget behaviors through the models, the results were statistically null. In practical terms, chamois did not increase their vigilance when standing in red zone wolf areas, and they did not stop eating when the temperature spiked. The researchers pivoted. They shifted the models away from time percentages and applied a count model looking strictly at discrete aggressive interactions. The model output a highly significant p-value of 0.035 for the interaction between temperature and sex. These results indicate climate pressure targets social stability, even when the population's daily routine remains intact. Returning to the interaction graph, we can decode the biology driving these lines, starting with the females. During the summer, female chamois live in cohesive, multi-generational herds. They face a strict dual mandate. They must acquire massive caloric resources to sustain lactation, while simultaneously staying close to rugged, safe terrain to protect their vulnerable offspring. As midday temperatures spike, the availability of thermal refugia, the shaded, safe microhabitats they rely on, drastically shrinks. This creates a zero-sum spatial reality. A large herd is effectively compressed into a shrinking physical footprint. That rising yellow line represents heightened intragroup combat for access to these increasingly rare, life-saving patches of shade. For females, thermal stress directly engineers social friction because cooling down requires securing localized, fiercely contested physical space. Now look at the exact opposite reaction observed in the male population. Unlike females, adult males are solitary during the hottest months. They prioritize high-risk, high-gain foraging in exposed areas to build body mass for the autumn rut. Male aggression is tied almost entirely to asserting dominance and reaffirming hierarchy, not fighting over a localized patch of shade. Physical combat carries a severe biological constraint. Intense muscle exertion generates immense metabolic heat. For a large endotherm, fighting in high summer heat is physically dangerous. Dropping their aggression rates to zero isn't a passive choice. It is a mandatory physiological override. They literally cannot afford the thermal load of a fight. Males cool down socially because it is the only way they can survive thermally. A standard assumption in conservation is that extreme temperatures kill herbivores primarily through starvation or by making them vulnerable to predators. The data from Monte Grappa reveals that the immediate threat to this population is sublethal thermal stress destabilizing their social hierarchies. This invisible energetic tax disproportionately punishes the population's most vulnerable members. Lactating females and their yearlings bear the brunt of this increased physical conflict. The breakdown in social tolerance represents a primary environmental impact, operating alongside more visible threats like food scarcity or predator avoidance.